Hi everyone, this is Paul here from the Magdalene Centre. Today I'm doing the astrology report for the month of October. We'll be outlining some of the key dates for the month where we have important events taking place, and be giving us the overall themes that will be highlighted by the astrology of the month. Before I do that though, I just want to clarify, as I always do, that the astrology doesn't control our lives. It gives us a framework to help us understand what is unfolding around us collectively, and it gives us a means to identify how can we better align with the natural cycles, how can we move with the natural flow of the energy and learn the lessons that are available for us on a collective level. But for that to happen, we also need to focus on being grounded and connected with the Earth's inherent rhythms, because the more connected and grounded we are to the Earth, the better able we are to naturally align with the planets and the messages that they're bringing to us, and the more or better able we are to respond to events based on awareness of what's unfolding around us. Now, in terms of the astrology for October, the main themes, if you like, are with us going through the second half of the astrological astrological wheel now. Libra is the first of the collective signs, and it's also a key one in terms of delving into our shadow and bringing the depths of ourselves into the light of awareness. And this is particularly true both for Libra and Scorpio. Libra brings the awareness of it, and Scorpio brings the necessary tools to transform it. So during this month, with the Sun in Libra up until 23rd, we're looking at observing our relationship with other people, observing the way we interact, and keeping in mind the core principle that every person around us mirrors back to us certain qualities about ourselves. Some people mirror back the positive qualities and the untapped potentials around that we have within us, and these are the people that when we're around them we feel upbeat, we feel inspired by their example, because that person's demonstrating qualities that we have the potential to develop within us. Likewise, we also have other people who highlight or reflect back shadow qualities within us. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person is doing anything bad or anything like that, but they may be comfortable expressing a facet of themselves which we have within us as well, and deep down we're aware of it. However, we're not comfortable about it, and as such we end up projecting it onto other people. It's a key part of the transformation and the alchemy of October here is to begin by developing the awareness that we have these traits, and rather than judging them, rather than hating ourselves or rejecting them, it's pulling back our projections from other people and identifying the quality about that person that is causing our shadow to flare, and become aware of that quality within us and learn to just accept it and embrace it and bring the light of our awareness into the equation and shine a light on it, so the light brings balance to the shadow. This then leads on nicely to the Sun's movement into Scorpio, which is all about the alchemy of transforming it. If Libra brings the awareness, Scorpio brings the transformation. We can actually see Scorpio is also about learning to shed the old as such. We can see this unfolding around us in nature here in the Northern Hemisphere because we're moving into the winter months. As the trees demonstrate it, they demonstrate the power of letting go. They've reached a point where there's not enough light for what they need to do, and holding on to the leaves would waste too much valuable energy. So they naturally just withdraw their energy from the leaves and just let the leaves naturally drop off as the energy is withdrawn from them. And the same is something that we need to be doing within our own lives. It's looking at where do we need to start letting go of things, what has served its purpose in our lives, and to hold on to it would end up wasting energy for the next phase of the cycle. So we've taken that inward journey now, and it's recognizing what things, whether it be possessions, like physical possessions, or objects, whether it be mental patterns, emotional patterns, or anything along these lines, whether it be relationships with certain people that have reached a point where it's obvious that it's not destined to carry on as it is. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be, the relationship needs to go all together, but the way that the relationship manifests may need to be transformed at this point. So the more we can have the courage to just let go of things when we recognise that it no longer serves us, rather than trying to hold on to it all the time, the more the energy we have to transform ourselves, because by letting go of things which no longer belong, it liberates the energy of that thing. It frees up parts of our psyche to create space for new beginnings in the future, and we can start to see the seeds of new potentials that we may want to cultivate from next year's astrological cycle onwards. So this is a core time of year for doing that inner work of gazing into our own shadow, making peace with it first of all, and then transforming it through spiritual alchemy, where the negative manifestations of it are shed through facing it, accepting it, shining the light of love on it, so it can then be shed. And from here, the gifts within it can come to the surface, where the positive traits that may not have been fully developed before can now come to the forefront, and we can strengthen them. So it's all about self-empowerment and self-mastery. The more we master the deeper levels of our unconscious mind through bringing the light of awareness to it and transforming it, the more agency we release into our lives, the more capacity we have to transform ourselves and our environment, and the more control we have over our lives. Not necessarily controlling external events, but controlling the way that we interact with things, so that events no longer have the power to trigger us. We respond to situations rather than react to them. Now, this is also a month due to both Venus turning retrograde on the 5th of October, having a new moon in Libra on the 9th, and on the 11th Juno is turning retrograde. October and most of November is going to be a key time of reviewing the nature of our relationships, and in Venus' case it's also about evaluating or looking at our value system and seeing where do we have old outmoded value systems, most likely it's ones that have been conditioned into us, but it's becoming toxic to who we're becoming. Because ideally, if we're living our lives, we're going through a natural unfoldment as old layers are stripped away to expose new ones and get closer to our true sense of who we are. And part of this is about periodically reviewing our values and transforming them where need be, so that we're no longer using a value system that, for example, we may have been raised on a materialistic value system. We may have a more spiritual value system trying to make its way into our consciousness, and if we try and keep both together, they end up clashing, and it creates a holding pattern that means that we find it harder to move forward. So the more we can transform these values via the Venus retrograde, letting go of the old ones, and not necessarily immediately replacing them with a new value system, it's more creating the space for the new to unfold within us. Because if you don't clear space for something, you can't build something new. So the same is true with our relationships. It's a time where it's looking at the core root of relationships, because Venus is predominantly going to be in Scorpio up until the end of the month, when she moves into her home sign of Libra again. But for the most part, Venus is going to be predominantly retrograde in Scorpio, and this brings a key focus on the psychological underpinnings of the relationship, or the core nature of it. Is it a relationship that fosters authenticity, that allows honest and open communication with one another, and a willingness to transform situations, or transform the core of who we are through facing the shadow issues that relationships often highlight, and just getting rid of what no longer belongs, so that the nature of our relationships can become deeper and more authentic. But it's also, we may find that with certain relationships, either they've reached a point where they're no longer viable and we can't maintain them, or the Venus retrograde brings us conscious or subconscious awareness that the key issues that have been bubbling away in the undercurrents of the relationship, but are now reaching a critical point where it's either we face it and we transform the underlying problems, or the relationship breaks because the situation, neither one or both parties unwilling to make the necessary changes to deal with the underlying problems, in which case the relationship may break. So Venus is a bit of a make or break retrograde in terms of relationships, whilst Juno is all about first looking at issues around commitment and whether relationships have that foundation of honesty, equality, justice and harmony in the relationship. And is it a relationship that fulfills our needs, or where both parties are honoured equally, or is there a fundamental imbalance in the relationship? Is it we're constantly giving and the other person's always taking, or is it the other way around? Is the other person always giving, we're always taking? So it's very lopsided, and if that's the case, the Juno retrograde will more than likely bring these issues to the surface and prompt us to reevaluate and see, what changes do we need to make in the relationship that will enable equality, harmony and honesty, integrity with one another. Because it's about that need to be honoured in the relationship and to honour the other person. So it's about fidelity, if you like. Are we faithful in our relationships? Are we honest with our partners? Now this could be romantic relationship, marriage partnerships, but also Juno can cover relationships between people who it's not romantic, but it could be a deep platonic friendship. But basically anything that goes beyond just your average friendship, where it's got much deeper interaction, much deeper level of commitment to the friendship, in which case it's looking at the dynamics within our friendships and seeing, are there imbalances? Is one person always doing the giving and the other person always taking, or is there an equal exchange of giving and receiving? So this is a key month, and all the way through to the middle of November, where relationships, both brand new ones, or the more day-to-day friendships and the more committed friendships and relationships that we have, come under review, where the core nature of them needs to be evaluated. If the relationship has already got good solid foundations to it, then it may be more time for just deepening those through exploring various issues that may come up, or working together to highlight any current imbalances and address them. But as long as the core foundations are there, it doesn't necessarily mean that the retrogrades are going to undermine relationships, but they will cause us to question the fundamental foundation of them and see, are those foundations in place, or are relationships on rocky ground, in which case either we need to do the necessary work to transform them so that both parties are honoured equally, or if it's a relationship which is fundamentally unbalanced and whoever's benefiting from it isn't prepared to make any changes so that it swings back towards parity, then it may be a relationship that has to be let go of in order to free ourselves up to make space for new relationships which foster who we're becoming in life. We also have as I mentioned before, the new moon in Libra, so this gives us an opportunity to set new intention in these areas, whether it be fostering greater balance in our relationships, whether it's looking at cultivating qualities like tact and diplomacy and how we communicate. So if we need to try and point something out to someone, it's doing it in a tactful way so they're more likely to take the feedback on board. But it's also looking at developing or cultivating qualities like inner balance and inner peace, because it's only if we work on balancing on the inside that we can achieve balanced relationships externally with other people. So if we're at chaos within ourselves, and chances are relationships will be as well. If we can do the inner work that I mentioned earlier about transforming the shadow and bringing balance to it, then that inner balance can then flow outwards into our relationships. So balance and peace naturally radiate into the relationships and strengthen them. So we draw people into our peace rather than we be drawn into other people's chaos. And Libra also deals with things like justice. So if there are any imbalances in relationships, or if there are any injustices taking place, this is a time where we may become more aware of them and may seek to try and rectify those imbalances and try to bring things to a harmonious conclusion or harmonious resolution where both parties are honoured equally. So for some of us, we may be learning how to compromise if we struggle to do that, but overall it's also learning about how can we learn to operate in a more cooperative spirit, how can we come together and work together in the spirit of cooperation and harmony rather than constant competition with one another. Because when we work together in a true spirit of cooperation and harmony where each person is equally committed to the goal and each person seeks to help one another out, then we unlock synergy, which allows far greater goals to be manifested collectively than can be done as individuals. And the last thing to mention is the full moon in Taurus on the 24th of the month. So this is the balance between the Sun in Scorpio, Moon in Taurus, and it's basically about, it deals with values fundamentally and also our relationship with material things. Taurus deals with our personal resources, Scorpio is more about the shared. But at a deeper level, it's about first our relationship with us, our own sense of worth and our own sense of value. So in Scorpio, it's about that transformation, it's doing that deep inner work. Taurus reminds us to be grounded in the body, and that as important as it is to do the necessary inner work of transforming the shadow, it's to occasionally remember to lighten up and enjoy the simple things. Scorpio is a very deep and intense sign, and it seeks to get to the core of an issue, but if we're not careful we can overdo it and we can lose sight of the simple things that bring us day-to-day pleasure and just a small, yes, a surface level of reality. But it's, remember that whilst we don't own the fruits of the spirit, or we don't own the fruits of our labours, we can still enjoy them. It's about Scorpio is about learning to share things through breaking down any old selfish tendencies and transforming the psyche fundamentally through moving beyond the need for control and the need to try and manipulate other people to get things, and instead learning to share, and on the understanding that the more we openly share and the more we give in the spirit of love, the more we gain in the long term. So it's by overcoming the need for control and learning to surrender and have faith that our fundamental needs will be met, we can then, through the full moon in Taurus, balance out the tendency to overanalyze things and only look at the deeper or the darker side of things. Taurus reminds us to just lighten up from time to time, to remember to be grounded in the body, because this facilitates the necessity of being in the present moment. It's being in the present moment that allows us to do the transformational work of Scorpio. It's moving the mind beyond past or future and grounding it in the present moment. And if we're grounded in the body, which Taurus has a strong connection with, then it's easier to keep the mind grounded and to have a more realistic assessment of things. We're less likely to view things with suspicion or always look for a dark meaning for things. Sometimes there's a perfectly innocent explanation for things, and we just need to relax and allow the true nature of something to reveal itself to us, rather than constantly trying to dig deeper and always viewing things with suspicion. This doesn't mean that we become glib or we become lackadaisical or Pollyanna-ish, but it does mean that being grounded and being prepared to just trust that things may be better than they look initially, and just because something seems a bit off doesn't necessarily mean that something's wrong. But obviously, if it's abundantly clear that a key issue needs to be dealt with, then we've got the tools during this full moon to reflect on them and make the necessary changes. But as before, I'll do another video on this because it's a topic in its own right. But I hope that's a useful guide for October. As I said at the start, it's important we be grounded throughout the entire process, but the more grounded we are, the more easily we can be present with our own shadow issues, and less likely we are to blow them out of proportion through overthinking things. If we're in the present moment, allowing things to unfold naturally and allowing our shadow issues to be presented to us, and then being willing to transform them through accepting those parts of ourselves that we've rejected so far and integrating them, We achieve a more holistic level of integration of the mind. We're less likely to sabotage our efforts or undermine our goals or undermine our progress through engaging in controlling mechanisms and fear-based mechanisms based on manipulation, and we're less likely to hold ourselves in or keep ourselves in a holding pattern through projection, because we recall the projections and bring things into balance first of all, and then towards the end of the month we use Scorpio to transform things at the fundamental level so that we're then empowered and no longer affected by that shadow issue. And the more we do this throughout October, the more we set ourselves up for the next stage of the journey in November, where we continue with Scorpio, but obviously move on into Sagittarius, because next November there's a lot of change as well, but that's a separate report for another day. But the more we work through October and work on transforming our relationships with ourselves and with others, and transforming the relationship we have with our own shadow, the more empowered we can become, and the more we can break down the walls of the ego that enforce separation between one another, and move more close towards unity through recognizing that we all mirror one another, we all have certain elements in common, and the more we can focus on our common humanity rather than what keeps us separate or what divides us, the more we can unlock the power of cooperation and working together as teams, and the more harmony and synergy can be unlocked, and the greater the goals that we can achieve both as individuals and collectively through the willingness to work together rather than constantly focusing on gaining things or focusing on ourselves at the expense of others. So may October bring you much transformation and many lessons that will empower you for it going forward, and may this be a month of letting go of what no longer serves you and making space for new beginnings and the new seeds of potentials to be sown next year. So take care and may you be blessed.